It began with a scream no one heard. When officers arrived at the small apartment on Oakwood Street, the quiet morning air was already heavy with the smell of rain and something else, something metallic and final. Inside, 26-year-old Claire Matthews lay lifeless on the living room floor, her phone buzzing endlessly beside her. The screen glowed in the dim light, displaying message after message, all from the same person. A woman named Rachel Moore. At first glance, it looked like another tragic case of domestic violence. But as detectives scrolled through the hundreds of messages, desperate, angry, and threatening, they realized this was something darker. The texts told a story of obsession, jealousy, and a love triangle that had spiraled far beyond control. Claire had been living with her boyfriend, Daniel Reed, for almost a year. They met through mutual friends at a photography exhibit. Claire, bright and confident, worked as a marketing coordinator for a design firm. Daniel, a calm and thoughtful man in his early 30s, was a freelance photographer known for his gentle nature. To everyone who knew them, they seemed happy, the kind of couple who posted quiet Sunday breakfasts and sunset walks, the picture of modern domestic peace. But someone else saw that peace as a personal betrayal. Rachel Moore had dated Daniel for nearly 5 years before their breakup. By all accounts, their relationship had been intense, full of passion and volatility. When it ended, Rachel didn't just lose a partner, she lost her identity. Friends said she stopped answering calls, quit her job at a local art gallery, and spent her nights scrolling through Daniel's social media pages. When he began posting pictures with Claire, something inside Rachel cracked. She told herself it was just heartbreak. But heartbreak turned into fixation, fixation into obsession. The messages began innocently enough: "Can we talk? I just need closure." Then, the tone shifted. "You can't just replace me. Does she know who you really are?" And finally, "If I can't have you, no one will." Detectives later learned that Rachel had sent over 800 messages in the month before Claire's death. Many of them were long, erratic rants written in the middle of the night, others were calm, almost tender, like a lover speaking to someone still listening. But Daniel had blocked her weeks before. That didn't stop her. She created new accounts, new numbers, new ways to be heard. Claire, unaware of the full extent of Rachel's obsession, tried to ignore it. She trusted Daniel when he said, "She's harmless, just hurt." But friends noticed her growing unease. She started locking the apartment doors earlier, glancing at her phone with a flicker of anxiety whenever it vibrated. Then, 1 week before her death, Claire told a coworker something that would later haunt detectives: "She keeps watching my stories. Even when I block her, she finds a way." The rain outside the apartment continued to fall that morning as investigators photographed the scene. The messages kept lighting up Claire's phone, one last, chilling reminder of the woman whose love had turned lethal. Long before that rainy morning on Oakwood Street, the story had already begun to unravel. For Rachel Moore, the weeks after her breakup felt like living in reverse, every morning heavier than the last, every night longer. She had once been known for her spark, the quick laugh, the sharp wit, the way she lit up an art gallery opening just by walking in. But when Daniel left, the light in her life dimmed, replaced by silence that pressed against her chest. At first, she tried to pretend she was fine. She met friends for coffee, posted pictures of sunsets and self-care quotes. But behind that carefully crafted calm, her thoughts spun in loops. She couldn't stop replaying their last conversation, Daniel's quiet voice saying, "We're not good for each other anymore." The way he didn't look back when he walked out the door. What broke her most wasn't losing him, it was knowing he had moved on so easily. Seeing his photos with Claire Matthews, the new woman in his life, felt like a knife twisting slowly. Claire looked everything Rachel wasn't anymore: carefree, stable, happy. The sight of them together sent Rachel spiraling. Her phone became both her weapon and her lifeline. She scrolled for hours through their tagged pictures, zooming in on smiles, trying to find cracks, anything that would prove Daniel wasn't really happy. Each time she saw them together, she felt her pulse quicken, her thoughts darken. She started to write messages she never sent. You think she knows the real you? You'll come back when you realize what you lost. But eventually, she did send them. Dozens at first. Then hundreds. She stopped going to work at the gallery. The director, a kind older man named Michael, called several times, offering to help. She never answered. The dishes piled up. Curtains stayed closed. Food went untouched. Her world shrank to the glow of her phone screen. At night, neighbors sometimes heard her talking to herself through the thin apartment walls, one voice pleading, another accusing. The sound of pacing footsteps, the occasional crash of something breaking. Meanwhile, Daniel and Claire tried to live normally. Daniel had warned Rachel to stop contacting him, even threatened to report her if she didn't. But he still felt pity. He knew she wasn't well, and that pity made him hesitate to block her completely. Claire, though, began to feel watched. There were moments when she swore she saw the same car parked near their building, a dark blue sedan with tinted windows. Once, while leaving work late, she spotted a figure across the street, slim, female, holding a phone, standing perfectly still under a streetlight. When Claire blinked, the woman was gone. Her friends told her she was overthinking, that breakups can make people act weird. Daniel said, "She's not dangerous. Just lost." But Rachel's texts were becoming darker. "You think you've won, but I was here first. He doesn't love you, he's just confused. You'll see. He belongs with me." By early March, Rachel's family had started to worry. Her sister, Nicole, came by one afternoon to check on her and found Rachel sitting in her dark living room, surrounded by empty coffee cups and the flicker of phone screens. When Nicole tried to talk about therapy, Rachel snapped. "I don't need help. I just need him to remember who we are." That night, Rachel created a fake account using Claire's name. She started sending messages to Daniel from it, pretending Claire was hiding things, trying to plant seeds of doubt. When that failed, she began showing up at places she knew they'd be, the coffee shop where Daniel edited his photos, the park where they walked their dog. She never approached them, but always watched from a distance, invisible and yet everywhere. Detectives would later trace her location history. It showed dozens of pings near Claire's apartment, at all hours of the night. By the time spring came, Rachel's obsession had hardened into something colder, sharper. It was no longer about heartbreak. It was about ownership. In her mind, Daniel wasn't gone, he'd been stolen. And she would do anything to get him back. The first time Rachel Moore saw them together in person, something inside her cracked like glass. It was a bright Saturday morning in late March. Claire Matthews and Daniel Reed were at a small farmer's market downtown, the kind of place filled with laughter, music, and the smell of roasted coffee. Rachel had followed them there, parking across the street, sitting motionless behind the wheel of her blue sedan. She watched through the windshield as Claire leaned into Daniel's shoulder, laughing at something he said. Her hair glimmered in the sunlight. The sight made Rachel's pulse throb in her temples. It wasn't just jealousy now, it was humiliation. The life she once had was now on display, lived by someone else. Her hand trembled as she lifted her phone. She took pictures. Dozens of them. Each one like proof of betrayal. "You replaced me with this," she muttered under her breath. She stayed there for nearly an hour, watching as they bought flowers, shared a croissant, and walked hand in hand down the street. It felt like the universe was mocking her. That night, Rachel sent Daniel a final, furious message. "I hope you know what you've done to me." She didn't sleep. She sat on the floor of her apartment, surrounded by photos, messages, and fragments of their life together, the movie tickets, the postcards, the necklace he'd given her years ago. She replayed every memory until anger was the only thing left. 2 days later, she showed up at Daniel's apartment. It was early evening when she rang the doorbell. Daniel answered, surprised to see her standing there in the hallway, soaked from the drizzle outside. Her eyes were red, her voice trembling. "Daniel, please. Just 5 minutes." He hesitated, then stepped outside, closing the door behind him. Claire was in the kitchen, unaware of the storm gathering outside. Rachel spoke quickly, her words tumbling over each other. "You said you loved me. You said we'd always be connected. I just need to understand how you can throw that away." Daniel's voice was steady, but there was weariness in his tone. "Rachel, it's over. It's been over for a long time. You need to move on." She laughed bitterly. "Move on? To what? Watching you build a new life with her?" "Rachel, please," he said softly. "This isn't helping either of us." Something flickered in her eyes, a momentary loss of control. "You think she's better than me, don't you? You think I'm crazy." Daniel stepped back. "I think you need help." That single sentence broke whatever fragile restraint she had left. Her face hardened, and for a long, silent second, she just stared at him, as if memorizing every line of his face before he disappeared forever. Then she turned and left. But as she walked away, something inside her shifted. The humiliation had burned away, leaving only resolve. She didn't cry. She didn't text. She simply planned. Over the next few days, Rachel stopped responding to her sister's calls. She quit paying rent. Her landlord said the apartment grew eerily silent, except for the glow of a single lamp left on at night. Meanwhile, Claire began to notice strange things. A key she was sure she'd left on the counter had gone missing. The back gate was found unlatched, though Daniel insisted he hadn't used it. Once, coming home late from work, she found a single rose lying on their doorstep, no note, no explanation. The tension between Claire and Daniel began to grow. She wanted to call the police, but Daniel was still convinced Rachel was just acting out of heartbreak. "She'll stop eventually," he said. But she didn't stop. Rachel's messages became erratic again, long bursts of emotion alternating with chilling calm. "I forgive you. I see you everywhere. We were supposed to grow old together." Detectives would later find those messages time-stamped at odd hours, 2:37 a.m., 4:12 a.m., 5:01 a.m., as if sleep had become irrelevant to her. One evening, Claire walked out of her office and found a note tucked under her windshield wiper. It wasn't handwritten, it was printed, the letters blocky and impersonal. "You don't belong with him." The next day, she finally called the police. They advised her to document everything, to change her passwords, to avoid being alone. But it was too late. Because Rachel was already watching. That week, surveillance cameras from a nearby gas station caught a blue sedan circling Claire's neighborhood multiple times after midnight. Each night, the same pattern. Each time, a little closer. And then, one evening in April, Rachel waited. She had decided this wouldn't be another night of watching. This time, she would act. The night it happened began like any other, quiet, still, deceptively ordinary. It was a Friday in early April. The air was damp, heavy with the scent of rain-soaked pavement and the distant hum of passing cars. Inside the small apartment on Oakwood Street, Claire Matthews had just finished a late dinner with Daniel Reed. They were talking about weekend plans, a friend's birthday, a movie, maybe a quiet morning at the park. For the first time in weeks, Claire felt almost normal again. The police report would later note that the lights went out at 10:43 p.m. Neighbors heard faint laughter, then nothing but the low rumble of thunder rolling across the sky. But outside, parked half a block away, a blue sedan sat idling in the dark. Rachel Moore was behind the wheel. She had been there for nearly an hour, watching the glow from the apartment windows. In the passenger seat beside her was her phone, open to a photo of Daniel and Claire, the one she hated most. Her reflection stared back at her from the cracked screen, pale, sleepless eyes, trembling hands, mascara streaked from tears that had dried hours ago. In her mind, this wasn't rage, it was justice. She whispered to herself, he was mine first. Around 11 p.m., the lights inside the apartment dimmed completely. Rachel's heartbeat quickened. She stepped out of the car, clutching the small kitchen knife she'd taken earlier from her own drawer. The rain had started again, light at first, tapping softly against her coat. She pulled up her hood and moved through the shadows. Inside, Claire had gone to bed, leaving Daniel on the couch editing photos on his laptop. He didn't hear the faint creak of the gate outside, or the soft click of the back door latch. The lock had been forced. Detectives later found scratches on the metal where a small tool had been wedged in. Rachel slipped inside silently, her shoes leaving small, wet prints across the tile. For a moment, she just stood there, listening. The sound of typing drifted from the living room. She saw Daniel's silhouette in the glow of the computer screen, familiar, yet impossibly distant. "Daniel," she whispered. He froze. Slowly, he turned, his face draining of color. "Rachel? What are you?" Before he could finish, she raised her hand. "Don't say her name." Her voice was trembling, but her eyes were cold, almost detached. "I just needed to see you. To make you remember." "Rachel, you can't be here," he said quietly, standing up. "You need to leave." She took a step closer. "Do you love her?" He hesitated, and that hesitation was enough. Her lip quivered, and something in her expression shattered. "You do," she said flatly. "After everything I gave you, you still chose her." Daniel moved toward her slowly, palms out. "Please. Let's just talk." But the sound of movement from the bedroom changed everything. Claire's voice called softly, "Daniel? Who's out there?" Rachel's expression twisted. The words hit her like sparks on dry wood. She spun toward the hallway just as Claire stepped into view, confused, half asleep, wearing an oversized shirt. The next few moments unfolded too fast to stop. Rachel lunged forward, shouting words neither of them would ever clearly remember. Daniel tried to intervene, but by the time he reached them, it was too late. A brief struggle. A scream. A single, sharp motion that silenced the world around them. When it was over, Claire was on the floor, her hand clutching at her side, blood spreading between her fingers. Daniel caught her as she fell, his voice breaking in disbelief. Rachel stood motionless, the knife still in her hand. The rain outside had turned into a downpour, the sound merging with Daniel's desperate cries for help. For a second, Rachel looked as if she didn't understand what she'd done, her expression blank, almost peaceful. Then came the sirens. Someone had heard the commotion and called the police. Rachel dropped the knife, her arms limp at her sides. She whispered, almost to herself, "I didn't mean to hurt her. I just wanted him to understand." When officers burst through the door minutes later, Daniel was kneeling beside Claire, sobbing, his hands covered in red. Rachel didn't resist as they handcuffed her. She only kept repeating the same words, her voice distant and hollow, "I loved too much. I just loved too much." The scene that night would haunt the responding officers, the glow of the laptop still playing soft music, the rain beating against the window, and a love that had turned into something unrecognizable. For Claire, there would be no tomorrow. For Rachel, there would be no way back. The storm that night carried into morning, a steady rain that turned the streets of the city into mirrors of flashing red and blue lights. Inside the police station, Rachel Moore sat in a small gray room, her wet hair clinging to her face, her hands trembling despite the blanket draped around her shoulders. Across from her sat Detective Alan Graves, a calm, methodical man who had seen his share of heartbreak and horror. Still, something about this case unsettled him. Maybe it was how ordinary the woman before him looked, not like a criminal, but like someone's neighbor, someone who might once have smiled at strangers in the grocery store. Rachel's first words were soft, almost apologetic. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she whispered. "I just needed him to listen." Graves leaned forward slightly. "You broke into their apartment, Rachel. You brought a knife. Help me understand why." Her eyes filled with tears, but there was an edge beneath them, something desperate, almost defiant. "I wasn't trying to hurt her. I was trying to make him remember. He promised we'd always belong to each other." Graves said nothing, letting the silence stretch. Rachel shifted in her chair, her voice trembling. "I didn't know she'd come out of the room. If she had just stayed back, if she hadn't said anything, it wouldn't have happened." He scribbled a note, his tone measured. "You're saying it was an accident?" Rachel nodded quickly. "Yes. I was scared. I just wanted to talk." Then she screamed, and she pressed her hands to her face. Everything went black. But detectives didn't buy her story. They had already seen the hundreds of messages, the fake accounts, the printed notes left at Claire Matthews' workplace. The evidence painted a far more deliberate picture, one of obsession, not a momentary lapse. Hours later, when the formal questioning ended, Rachel was booked for second-degree murder. She didn't fight, didn't cry, didn't even ask for a lawyer until the paperwork was nearly done. The booking officer later said she looked hollow, like someone who had already accepted the ending. The trial drew national attention months later. News outlets framed it as a modern tragedy born from digital obsession. Outside the courthouse, reporters called it a crime of passion. But inside, the atmosphere was heavy, sorrow, not spectacle. Daniel Reed attended every day, his face pale and drawn, often staring at the floor. He testified about the messages, the unending harassment, and the night of the attack. His voice cracked when he described holding Claire as she slipped away, whispering her name, begging her to stay awake. When Rachel's defense attorney took the floor, he painted her as a woman crushed under the weight of rejection. He spoke of heartbreak, mental decline, and emotional collapse. She was sick, he told the jury. She needed help, not hatred. But the prosecution countered with precision. They showed screenshots, phone records, and location data proving that Rachel had stalked the couple for weeks. They described her internet searches, how to make someone listen to you, when jealousy becomes dangerous, restraining order consequences. The most chilling evidence came from her journal, discovered in her apartment. On one page, written in shaky pen, were the words, "If I can't make him remember, I'll make sure she's gone." The courtroom fell silent when those words were read aloud. Even Rachel's own attorney looked momentarily shaken. Throughout the trial, Rachel remained composed. She often looked toward Daniel, her gaze blank, unblinking. Once, when a photograph of Claire was shown on the screen, a smiling portrait from her last birthday, Rachel's lips moved, barely audible. She wasn't supposed to be there. After 4 days of testimony and 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict, guilty of second-degree murder. As the judge read the sentence, 25 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 18, Rachel didn't cry. She simply nodded, as if acknowledging a truth she had already known. Daniel sat motionless in the gallery, tears streaming silently down his face. The world around him blurred, the clicking of cameras, the murmurs of reporters, the rustle of papers. All he could see was the memory of Claire's final moments, replaying like a broken reel he couldn't shut off. When Rachel was escorted out of the courtroom, she turned once toward him. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. "I wasn't trying to destroy us, Daniel. I was trying to keep us." He didn't respond. That moment, quiet, chilling, unforgettable, would linger long after the courtroom emptied. In the weeks after the verdict, the world seemed to move on, but for those left behind, time stood still. The apartment on Oakwood Street stayed empty for months. Rain washed away the chalk markings on the pavement where investigators had stood that night. The neighbors stopped whispering, though the silence that followed carried its own kind of echo. Daniel Reed couldn't bring himself to go back inside. He packed a single suitcase and left the city within days of the trial. Friends said he moved to Asheville, North Carolina, renting a small cabin surrounded by pine trees and silence. There, he tried to rebuild a life from what was left. But rebuilding isn't the same as healing. Some nights, he still woke up to the sound of Claire's voice, half memory, half dream. He kept one of her photographs on his desk, a candid shot he'd taken the summer before, sunlight in her hair, her head tilted back mid-laughter. It was the image of everything pure and uncomplicated, the kind of moment that makes you believe in forever. Every year, on the anniversary of her death, Daniel lit a single candle by the photo. He never said her name out loud, but the silence around him always seemed to answer. At the Women's Correctional Facility 200 miles away, Rachel Moore lived a life stripped of everything familiar. Her cell was small, gray, and quiet, a kind of stillness that should have brought peace but never did. In the first months of her sentence, she refused visitors, including her sister. She spent her days reading, cleaning, and writing in notebooks that she tore up before anyone could read them. The prison psychologist noted her as composed, articulate, detached. When asked about the night of the crime, she always gave the same answer: "I just wanted to stop the pain." But over time, her detachment faded. She began attending group therapy, where she finally spoke about Daniel, about the love she twisted into something unrecognizable, about the night spent alone scrolling through photos until the line between memory and fantasy blurred. "I thought if I couldn't have him, I'd disappear," she said one day. "But I made someone else disappear instead." Those words, quiet and heavy, were recorded in her psychological evaluation. They marked the first time she admitted guilt, not in court, but in conscience. For Claire Matthews' family, justice offered no comfort, only finality. Her parents turned her old bedroom into a space filled with flowers and photos, a place they visited on birthdays and holidays. Her mother often said, "She was light, that's all she ever was." The community, once shaken by fear and disbelief, slowly returned to its rhythms. Yet for those who remembered, the case became more than a headline, it became a cautionary story shared in quiet tones. A story about how something as simple as a text message, a late-night glance at a phone screen, could be the first crack in a life's foundation. Detective Alan Graves, long since moved on to other cases, admitted in an interview years later that this one stayed with him more than any other. "It wasn't about hate," he said. "That's what makes it hard to understand. It was about love twisted so far that it forgot what love is." Years passed. Rachel Moore's name faded from the news, replaced by newer tragedies. Daniel never remarried. He focused on his photography, capturing quiet landscapes, empty roads, lonely skies, reflections on still water. His work was exhibited once, under the title, "Things We Leave Behind." Viewers said the photos felt haunting and peaceful all at once. No one needed to ask who they were for. On the 5th anniversary of Claire's death, Daniel visited her parents for the first time since the trial. They sat together on the porch as the sun set, saying little. Grief had softened with time, but it never truly left. Before leaving, Daniel walked to the small memorial garden in their yard. He placed a single white lily beside the stone that bore her name. The wind rustled through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang. He closed his eyes, whispering, "I'm sorry I couldn't save you." Then he walked away, slowly, quietly, leaving behind the weight of everything he once thought he could control. In the end, the story of Claire Matthews, Daniel Reed, and Rachel Moore was not just a tragedy of jealousy or violence. It was a portrait of how love, when poisoned by obsession, can erode every boundary between reason and ruin. A reminder that sometimes, the most dangerous thing in the world isn't hatred, it's the love that refuses to let go.